Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, before I get started, I got to be upfront and be honest. I have a gas stove in my house, and I absolutely love it. It heats up water faster. It gets the water boiling quicker. The temperature is easy to change. It cooks faster. I turn it off, and it's off. I don't have to wait for it to cool down. And so I like my gas stove. I really like it a lot. You know, I didn't grow up with a gas stove. And so to have one and to use it and to cook with it, it's nice. But earlier this month, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission talked about banning gas stoves. The commissioner came out and he said products that cannot be made safe can be banned. Now, he backtracked and said, hey, no, sorry about that. We're not banning anything. No need to worry. No ban. But even with that, I'm still thinking, should we ban gas stoves? How big of a problem are gas stoves? And is this an environmental justice issue, using gas stoves and having them in our homes? I'm really wondering how to think about that. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about gas stoves. Should they be banned? Should we talk about banning them? If we have them in our home, should we replace them? And what are the environmental justice implications of these gas stoves? Stay tuned. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. I'm Dr. Joseph, and today we're talking about gas stoves. And earlier this month, there was discussion and debate and arguing about banning them because of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission's discussion about getting rid of them out of people's homes. And so I want to talk about it. And let's talk about, first of all, why we would even consider banning gas stoves to begin with. And so just so you know, the idea of banning gas stoves is not entirely new. There's been debate on this for a while now. So in 2020, there was a big report issued by different environmental groups, the Sierra Club, the Rocky Mountain Institute, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and they talked about the health concerns and issues with gas stoves. They talked about how they produce high levels of carbon monoxide, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and how those gases have resulted in increased risks of asthma and other respiratory illnesses, things like COPD. And there have been studies that have shown that these stoves do emit these types of harmful gases. The links are in the description. And so that's been going on. That was 2020, 2021. People have been kind of discussing it kind of here and there. And then late last year, December 2022, a big research study came out that says explicitly that 12.7% of childhood cases of asthma can be attributed to gas stoves in the home. This was an official peer-reviewed scientific study. The link is in the description. You can look at that as well. And from that study, the Product Safety Commission then said, well, we can't have these in the home. If we can't make these products safe, they can be banned. And of course, there was a big uproar. Politicians, commentators, Twitter, all of your favorite social media sites blew up with this idea that the government's going to come and take your gas stoves from your house. And there were some people that were saying, hey, maybe we should take those gas stoves out of the houses because they're causing asthma and we don't want that in our children. And so we're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so we just need to stop for a second and think it through. Just think it through for 1 second. And so first thing we have to do, because this is the Environmental Justice Lab, we come into the lab, we have to think about what these studies are actually saying, review them and understand how the study was done, what the parameters were, how they got to their conclusion, and see if we should, first of all, even accept what the media is portraying as the results. So I would encourage all of you to read the study. Read it for yourself. Don't just take the article about the study. Don't take the tweet about the number that they pulled from the study and go off of that. Read the study. So I read it. I put it in the description so you can read it. And what I learned was a couple of things. One, that 12.7% figure was based off of 9 states. not all 50. So the actual percentage of asthma-related cases due to gas stove usage varies from state to state. That's one thing. Second, I'm pretty sure your state was probably not included in the study. I know mine wasn't. So that's one thing to think about. Now, as you look at the study, you will see that among those 9 states, there are differences. And those differences do correlate with the amount of gas stoves in the homes in those states. So the more people have gas stoves in their houses, the higher the percentage of asthma in those states attributed to those stoves. And so there is a correlation there. But should we lean on the 12.7% figure? I don't know if I would. It is a nice number to kind of talk about and discuss, but just be careful about what numbers you're using and how you get those numbers. I wouldn't want you to just talk about certain numbers without actually knowing where they came from and see if you agree with them. That's with any study, any approach. I mean, we're talking about environmental justice. We know based on data how environmental hazards are thrust upon certain communities more so than others. It's based on data. It's not just based on small sample size studies or intuition. We're using real numbers. And so think about that. And so, of course, when you read the articles and you hear the discussion, it's easy to get swept up in it without going to the primary source to see what's actually there. So think about that first of all. And second of all, think about who's upset and who's not when the discussion starts coming about banning gas stoves. So when I started looking through the comments, the response articles, and all the people speaking out, it really broke up into 2 camps. One, which seemed to be, there's no way the government's going to come in here and take my stove. I don't want to hear it. If they want to come, they're going to meet some strong resistance because I'm not giving it up. That was one group. And in the second group, we have people who are saying, yes, take these stoves away because we know that they're harmful, and people who look like us, people in Black and brown communities, low-income communities, are at higher risks of asthma and these illnesses anyway, and we're exacerbating it by having these stoves around. Take them, take them, take them. I saw this article where a couple of senators signed on to have these stoves evaluated and removed on that premise, and they were using an environmental justice argument to make the case, saying that these communities are already overburdened with hazards in their communities. They're at higher risk for these diseases, and we shouldn't have these stoves around because it will affect them more than anyone else. Now, of course, the backlash came. The agency and the commissioner of the agency backed off of his claim, and he said, we're not coming for your stoves. That's not going to happen. Biden and his White House administration came out and said, we're not banning stoves. Everybody just calm down. So we're at this point now where people aren't worried as much about gas stoves anymore being taken away. But we should still think about it, and we should still ask ourselves if we should consider doing something about these stoves and think about protecting vulnerable people in the process. So my next question was, do gas stoves have anything to do with environmental justice? That's what I'm concerned about. And so this is what we do know. We know that cooking with gas emits harmful pollutants. The studies show it. We can see it. We know that gas stoves produce more pollution than electric ones. We've seen it. We also know from the research that you can see an increase in childhood asthma when you have an increase in the use of gas stoves. Those two things do go together. We can't deny that or ignore it either. That's a fact. The research bears that out. Nobody disagrees. The third thing we can say is that Black and brown children, low-income communities, people who live in these areas are more likely to have asthma and these other types of illnesses because of their proximity to other polluting facilities. We're talking about coal-fired power plants. We're talking about wastewater treatment plants. We're talking about landfills. We're talking about large industries and large factories. We know that that's going to create more health burdens for these communities as opposed to others. And so that's also a fact. Now, one thing we don't know, which I think is really important, is who actually has a gas stove. Because when I was growing up, we didn't have one. And I wonder how many people, how many households in these low-income communities, in these Black and brown communities, actually have a gas stove in their home. Because for me, that's the real issue. That's the question. I have one now, as an adult, and we live in a different neighborhood than we grew up in, and we're able to do things that we couldn't do when I was growing up because we have more resources, and that's fine. But I know if I was growing up where we grew up with a gas stove and I knew all this about gas cooking, I would have great concerns. And so if we find out that, yes, these low-income communities, these apartment buildings, these Black communities that are already overburdened with these issues are also cooking with gas inside their home, so they're breathing toxic air outside and inside consistently, then we have a real problem. This is a real problem that we have to think about. Now, just so I can be transparent, I always thought that a gas stove was a luxury, something that rich people got to have in their homes because they had access to things that we didn't have growing up. That's what I was thinking. And so I wasn't even imagining ever cooking with a gas stove. And so I'll be interested to know if, in fact, these are becoming more and more prevalent and that more and more states and more cities are requiring the use of gas versus what currently happens now, which is you plug your electric stove in, that kind of stuff. And so I'm wondering where things are going with this whole gas versus electric cooking. Because here's some more things we have to understand. For one, gas, it produces more pollution in the home. We breathe it in and we have children who could be impacted by it, but it's also more energy efficient. And so when you think about how much energy it takes to cook with gas versus cooking with electricity, there's no comparison. All the studies have shown that gas is 3 times more efficient than electric when it comes to cooking. Now, there might be less pollution with electric, but it takes a lot more energy to cook with electricity. And we know that those electric stoves, anything electric, is being powered by whatever the power grid is in your community. And so where I live, it's coal, it's some nuclear. It's mainly a mix of energy production that is harmful to the environment, that produces a lot of carbon. And so the idea of having more electricity produced and having a higher demand for electricity would result in more and more production from these dirty fossil fuel facilities. Something to think about. And so when we talk about what's best for our communities and what's best for the people who might be impacted by whatever source of cooking they choose to use, we have 2 things to consider. One is a more direct impact from gas over time as you use it, producing those toxic gases that can compromise your health in your home. Then there's this idea of all of us switching to electric, having a higher demand for electricity, and thus ramping up production at these other carbon-heavy production facilities that will result in more and more of these gases being emitted into the air and exacerbating climate change. And not only that, but also the byproducts of this production as well. So ash, soot, all these things that have to be disposed of, these also become problems as well. And so we have to be mindful and think about these things and really be strategic in how we spend our energy as it relates to this cooking issue. And so for me, right now in this moment, this is what I think we should do moving forward. So first of all, if you have a gas stove in your home, just know that when you turn it on and it click, 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 and you have your flame, you are producing emissions at a rate that would not be safe for small children. So what you should consider doing, if you're cooking with gas, try to get your children away from it. Try to do it at times where your children aren't around. If they are there with you, open up a window, turn that vent fan on above it. If you have a hood, use that hood to get those fumes out of your home as you're cooking, and just improve the ventilation however you can to keep your family safe. That's the first thing you should do. I'm not going to tell you to go out, take your gas stove and trade it in for an electric one and spend that money. You might not have that money. You might not be able to do that. Everybody can't just go and buy a brand new stove because they heard a report about the potential harm with gas. I mean, that's not possible. There are some tax benefits for switching from gas to electric. Be careful with those. You're not going to always get all of them because of how the tax code is structured. And so protect yourself at all costs when you're dealing with gas and when you're dealing with these types of emissions. Look out for each other. Look out for your family. If you know somebody who has gas in their home, let them know to take these precautions and to protect themselves. It's really important. And beyond that, let's try to minimize our use of electricity and energy and try to be efficient. And so in this case, instead of using a gas stove all the time for everything, maybe we use a microwave to do our reheating, to do some of our meals. Use our oven instead of our stove to cook, because those fumes won't be as apparent in the atmosphere around us if we can use a microwave, use an oven versus the stove. And just thinking about those kinds of things. If you live in an apartment building where there's gas stoves in it, hey, talk to your landlord about that. Say, look, we know these gas stoves are harmful. Can we get these replaced? We're in a small apartment. The ventilation is not as good. We don't feel comfortable continuing to use this gas stove. And if you can't get that stove replaced, make sure that there's ventilation. Make sure there's a vent. Make sure it's safe to use that gas stove in that apartment. I know our apartments were very small. We couldn't just sit around and cook with gas. I mean, if we had gas stoves in our apartment, we'd all be breathing it in all over the apartment. And so make sure that the people who manage the building, who you pay your rent to, are aware of your concerns and bring it to them. And if they're not willing to make any adjustments, try to get together and push for changes, for improvements, something to get them moving. Because as of right now, there's not going to be a full-on gas stove ban. And even if there was a ban, there would be a ban on the new construction, on the new products, on the new things. They're not going to go back into other people's houses and apartments and take their stoves away from them. They would never do that. Nobody's going to do that. And so just make sure you take care of yourself and make sure that you're aware of the danger and the harm that could possibly come from using gas stoves. Let's not bury our heads in the sand and pretend like we don't know these things. These things are real. These things are true. Your children's health, your health. If you have older people in your home, in your apartment, their health is important. We want all of us to be healthy and whole, not just from outdoor pollution, but potentially indoor pollution as well. And so let's all be mindful of that. And when it comes to actually thinking about a policy or thinking about an approach to dealing with gas stoves, it seems like until we can get a better mix of energy production from our cities and counties and states, where it's not so heavy on the fossil fuel, so heavy on the coal, and even natural gas to a large extent is pretty polluting, but not as much as coal, then this idea of having more electricity and demanding more electricity for our homes and for our appliances, it just doesn't feel right, because now we're asking these facilities that are usually located in Black and brown communities to produce more. More energy means more pollution, which means more problems for those who live around those areas. And so we have to be really careful and think through these things. We can't just be knee-jerk reacting to a study and not thinking about the full scope of what could take place if, in fact, we switch from gas to electric, if we, in fact, try to spend the money to upgrade. All these things need to be considered and taken into account. And so that's what I want you to think about today. So gas stoves, I have my own views. Obviously, I have a gas stove. I like it. We open up windows, we run the fan, and I would recommend the same thing for anybody listening who has a gas stove as well. Just be safe. And so those are my thoughts on gas stoves. What do you think about it? Do you have a gas stove? Do you love your gas stove? Do you hate your gas stove? Are you concerned about this information, this research that we are learning about in terms of the harm that could be done with gas stoves? Let me know what you think. Check the description for links to the research, to the reporting, to the articles, and let me know what you think about it. You might be able to convince me otherwise from what I'm thinking right now. Just let me know. And until then, I will see you next time. This has been the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. I am Dr. Joseph. We are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.